Some betrayals arrive with shouting. Others arrive with perfect calm. Mine came through a phone call from my eldest son on a quiet Tuesday morning while I sat on the porch of a lakeside cabin, enjoying my coffee and believing life had finally settled into peace. The call came at exactly 8:12 a.m. His name flashed across my screen. "Good morning, Dad," he said. His voice was polite, almost rehearsed, and that alone made me suspicious. My son, Nathan Mercer, never sounded that careful unless he had already made up his mind. "Morning," I answered. "What's going on?" There was a brief pause. "We've made a decision," he finally said. "It's time to sell the cabin. We'd like you to move out before the end of next month." I looked across the calm water without saying a word. He mistook my silence for acceptance. "Before I tell you what happened next, you should know who I am. My name is Harold Bennett. I am 71 years old and spent 4 decades working as a civil engineer. Every bridge, highway, and public project I designed taught me one lesson. Every structure stands or falls because of its foundation. Families are no different. I married the love of my life, Margaret, in 1982. Together we built a modest home in the small Wisconsin town of Ashbrook. We raised 2 boys there, Nathan and his younger brother, Ethan. Money was never abundant, but we always had enough because Margaret and I believed in living below our means. We drove used vehicles, repaired things instead of replacing them, and saved every extra dollar. Those savings eventually became something special. In 1994, I bought a small parcel of land beside Silver Pine Lake. Everyone thought I was making a foolish investment. Margaret laughed and handed me a sandwich while saying, "One day this place will be worth every penny." She was right. For 3 summers, I built the cabin with my own hands. Nathan carried lumber before he was strong enough to lift it properly. Ethan spent afternoons handing me nails and paintbrushes. Every board in that cabin held a memory of our family. Birthdays were celebrated there. Fishing trips became traditions. Every Independence Day ended with us sitting on the dock watching fireworks reflect across the water. When Margaret became seriously ill years later, we spent her final healthy summer there. We rarely talked. We simply watched sunsets together, knowing every moment mattered. After she passed away, the cabin became the only place where I could still feel close to her. That was why Nathan's phone call cut so deeply. To him, it had become an asset. To me, it was my last conversation with my wife. The warning signs hadn't appeared overnight. During recent holidays, Nathan had started asking strange questions. "What are your plans for the property? Have you updated your will? Do you think maintaining the cabin is becoming too expensive?" At first, I assumed he was concerned about my health. Then his questions became more specific. He asked about taxes, insurance, property values, local real estate prices. He wasn't worried about me. He was calculating numbers. 2 days before that Tuesday morning, Nathan had called again. "Ethan and I spoke with a realtor," he announced confidently. I nearly dropped my coffee. "You did what?" "We wanted professional advice before bringing it up to you." Professional advice. Those words echoed in my mind. They had contacted a realtor before speaking to the man who had built the cabin. "When exactly did this happen?" I asked. Nathan hesitated. "A few days ago." "And Ethan agreed?" "He thinks selling makes financial sense." I asked to speak with my younger son. His voice carried none of Nathan's confidence. "Dad, I wasn't sure about it, but you still went along." Silence answered me. That silence hurt almost as much as Nathan's words. I ended the call and remained on the porch for nearly an hour, listening to nothing except the breeze moving through the pine trees. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was heartbroken. The boys I had raised to value honesty had discussed selling my life's greatest achievement without asking my opinion. Eventually I stood, walked inside, and opened an old wooden cabinet Margaret used to call my important drawer. Inside rested a thick folder containing documents no one else had ever seen. I removed the folder carefully. A faint smile appeared on my face for the first time that week. Nathan believed he already understood my future. He had absolutely no idea what I had planned years earlier. 2 days after Nathan's first call, my phone rang again. His tone had changed. Gone was the careful politeness. Confidence had taken its place. "Dad," he said, "we've already signed the listing agreement. The realtor believes we'll have buyers within weeks. You should start packing." I leaned back in my chair and looked through the cabin window toward the lake. "Nathan," I asked calmly, "which cabin? Do you think I'm sitting in right now?" Silence. "Dad, what do you mean?" I asked a simple question. "The one at Silver Pine Lake." I smiled at myself. I never said that. Another long pause followed. "Then, where are you?" "I'm exactly where I need to be." He sounded irritated. "You're not making any sense." "I make perfect sense, son. You're simply listening to your expectations instead of my words." Before he could argue further, I ended the call. Sometimes silence teaches better than lectures. That afternoon, I drove into town and met my oldest friend, Walter Hayes, a retired county recorder who had spent his career handling land records. Walter had known me for nearly 40 years. He also happened to be the only person alive who knew my biggest secret. We met at our usual dinner. He poured himself another cup of coffee before speaking. "So," he said, "they finally made their move." I nodded. "They hired a realtor." Walter chuckled. "I wondered how long it would take." After Margaret passed away, I had changed in ways my sons never noticed. Grief has a way of teaching caution. 6 months after her funeral, I had taken a long drive through northern Wisconsin with no destination in mind. That drive changed everything. Hidden beyond winding forest roads, I discovered another lake. It was smaller than Silver Pine Lake, quieter, far more beautiful. Perched on a hill overlooking the water stood an old lakeside lodge surrounded by towering pine trees. Most people overlooked the property because it needed repairs. I saw something different. I saw peace. Within a month, I had purchased it. Unlike the first cabin, this wasn't a modest retreat. It was a spacious lodge with 3 bedrooms, a massive stone fireplace, a wraparound porch, and breathtaking sunsets every evening. It became the one place where I could sit alone and still feel Margaret's presence. But I never told Nathan or Ethan it existed. Instead, I placed the entire property into an irrevocable trust created in Margaret's memory. Everything had been prepared by an attorney in another city. Every document was legally protected. No family member knew, no neighbor suspected. Only Walter had witnessed the paperwork. "Still think you made the right decision?" Walter asked. "I do." He stirred his coffee slowly. "They're going to be shocked." "They've already shocked me." Walter nodded without arguing. A week later, he called again. "The listing is live." "So soon?" "Your son wasn't wasting time." "Any interest?" "More than interesting." He sighed. "The market's hot. There are already multiple inquiries." I thanked him and hung up. Nathan truly believed everything was unfolding exactly as he planned. Several days later, another phone call arrived. This time, excitement practically exploded through the speaker. "Dad, we got an offer." "Congratulations." "The buyers offered $385,000. "I see." "Dad, this is incredible." He spoke as though the money already belonged to him. We only need one final signature. I remained silent. My signature? I asked. Yes, it's just paperwork. Just paperwork. The words amused me. Nathan, do you remember what I asked you last week? What? I asked which cabin you thought I was sitting in. He sighed impatiently. Dad, what does that have to do with selling this place? It has everything to do with it. I don't understand. I know. I ended the call again. The following morning, I drove to Milwaukee for an appointment with my attorney, Daniel Foster, a brilliant estate lawyer who appreciated careful planning almost as much as I did. He spread every document across his conference table. The Silver Pine Lake deed, the trust documents, the listing agreement Nathan had signed, the purchase offer. After studying everything, Daniel leaned back and smiled. Your son listed property he doesn't have legal authority to sell. Correct. And he believes closing is only days away. Correct. Daniel tapped the deed. Every owner must approve the transfer. They're expecting me to sign. He looked at me over his glasses. What exactly do you want to do? I answered without hesitation. I want them to reach the closing table. He raised an eyebrow. All the way? Every step. He smiled knowingly. You planned for this years ago. I prepared for the possibility. There is a difference. Daniel laughed quietly. You engineers think 10 moves ahead. No, I replied. I simply learned that foundations matter. He closed the folder. Very well. The closing date was scheduled for the following Monday. Nathan believed he was about to sell the cabin. He believed the money was already his. He believed my signature was nothing more than a formality. He was about to discover that assumptions can become the most expensive mistakes a person ever makes. Monday arrived cold and gray. The kind of Wisconsin morning when frost clings to every blade of grass and the wind seems determined to remind you that winter is only getting started. I left home before sunrise, not because I was nervous, because I never liked arriving late. The title company's office sat inside a modest brick building just outside town. It wasn't impressive, but millions of dollars had changed hands inside those walls over the years. I parked my truck 12 minutes early. Old habits die hard. When I walked inside, the receptionist greeted me politely before directing me toward the conference room. Nathan was already there. He wore an expensive navy blazer I had never seen before. His smile was relaxed, almost victorious. You made it, he said, standing to shake my hand. I told you I would. Ethan arrived a minute later. Unlike his brother, he looked uneasy. His smile disappeared the moment our eyes met. The buyers, Richard and Laura Collins, were already seated across the table. They looked excited, quietly discussing furniture placement and weekends they planned to spend by the lake. I felt sorry for them. None of what was about to happen was their fault. The realtor, Scott Reynolds, arranged a thick stack of paperwork while chatting confidently with everyone in the room. He looked like a man expecting an easy commission. The title officer welcomed us and explained the order of the closing process. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Nathan leaned toward me. See, Dad? This won't take long. I simply nodded. One by one, documents were placed on the table. The buyers signed first. Scott smiled. This is moving quickly. Nathan signed next. Ethan hesitated before adding his signature. Finally, the title officer turned toward me. Mr. Bennett, we'll need your signature here. Before reaching for the pen, my phone vibrated. One message. Daniel Foster. Ready when you are. I stood. Everyone looked up. Excuse me, I said calmly. There's one phone call that needs to happen before anything else. Nathan frowned. Dad? It'll only take a moment. I stepped into the hallway and called Daniel. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. When I returned, I walked directly to Scott Reynolds and handed him my phone. My attorney would like a word. Scott looked confused but accepted the phone. His confident smile disappeared almost immediately. Wait. Silence. I wasn't aware of that. Another pause. His face lost its color. I understand. He slowly lowered the phone and handed it back to me. The room had become perfectly still. Scott cleared his throat before looking toward Nathan. I'm afraid we have a problem. Nathan laughed awkwardly. What kind of problem? Scott took a deep breath. This transaction cannot proceed. The buyers stared at him. Richard leaned forward. What do you mean it can't proceed? The property cannot legally be transferred. Laura frowned. We've already signed everything. I know. Nathan stood so suddenly that his chair slid backward. What are you talking about? Scott avoided his eyes. The deed requires unanimous approval from every legal owner. Nathan pointed toward me. My father is right here. Scott swallowed. Yes. So have him sign. He cannot. Nathan blinked. Why not? Scott looked genuinely uncomfortable. Because he has never agreed to sell. The room fell silent. Richard slowly folded his hands. You're telling me this sale was never legally authorized? Scott closed his eyes for a brief second. I'm afraid that's correct. Nathan turned toward me. Dad. I remained seated, calm, quiet, watching. You knew? I did. You let us get this far? Yes. His voice cracked. You could have stopped this weeks ago. I could have. Then why didn't you? I looked directly into his eyes. Because there are lessons people only understand when they experience the consequences themselves. Nobody spoke. Daniel entered the conference room moments later carrying a leather briefcase. He introduced himself politely before laying several documents across the table. Ladies and gentlemen, he began. I'll explain the situation clearly. He pointed toward the deed. Mr. Harold Bennett, Nathan Bennett, and Ethan Bennett are listed as co-owners. He paused. State law requires written approval from every owner before ownership can legally transfer. He looked toward Nathan. Mr. Bennett never granted that approval. Daniel then faced the buyers. The purchase agreement is therefore unenforceable. Richard sighed heavily. Laura looked devastated. So, we don't have a lake house? I'm afraid not. Daniel apologized sincerely before explaining that they could seek reimbursement for inspection fees, appraisal costs, and other expenses from the responsible parties. Neither buyer argued. They simply gathered their belongings in disappointed silence. As they prepared to leave, Richard stopped beside me. I hope everything works out for your family. So do I replied honestly. After they walked out, the room became much smaller. Only 4 people remained. Nathan, Ethan, Daniel, and me. Nathan stared at me with disbelief. You planned every bit of this? No. I shook my head slowly. I prepared for the possibility. His shoulders slumped. For the first time since this began, I no longer saw a confident businessman standing before me. I saw the little boy who once helped me build that cabin. And I knew the hardest part of the conversation had not even begun. The conference room remained silent long after the buyers walked away. Nathan stood near the window staring into the parking lot without really seeing it. Ethan stayed seated, elbows on the table, his hands covering his face. Neither of them spoke. Daniel quietly gathered the unused closing documents before looking at me. I'll wait outside, he said. I nodded. As the door closed behind him, only the 3 of us remained. Father, 2 sons, no lawyers, no buyers, no realtor, just the truth. Nathan finally broke the silence. You humiliated us. His voice wasn't angry anymore, it sounded defeated. I looked at him calmly. No, Nathan. He frowned. You humiliated yourselves. His shoulders stiffened. I trusted you. I shook my head. You trusted the money. He opened his mouth to argue but couldn't find the words. I continued. You hired a realtor before asking your own father. You signed legal papers for property that wasn't entirely yours. You told me to leave the cabin that your mother and I built together. I paused. And somehow you believed you were the victim. Nathan lowered his eyes. For the first time since this began, he had no answer. I turned toward Ethan. You knew this wasn't right. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I know. You could have stopped it. I should have. You followed your brother because it was easier than disagreeing. A tear rolled down his cheek. I was wrong. I nodded slowly. Yes. But admitting that is the first honest thing you've done in weeks. Neither son spoke. After several quiet moments, I reached inside my coat and removed a sealed envelope. I placed it in the center of the table. Nathan looked at it. What's that? My updated estate plan. Both brothers stared at me. I finalized it yesterday. Nathan looked confused. You changed your will? I changed much more than that. I opened the envelope and removed several documents. Daniel had prepared everything exactly as I requested. The Silver Pine cabin now belongs solely to me. Nathan looked stunned. What? Shared ownership has been legally dissolved. His face drained of color. You removed us? I did. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. Ethan slowly looked up. So, we don't own any part of it anymore? No, I folded my hands. The cabin will remain mine for as long as I live. Nathan sat down heavily. He looked as though the weight of the room had suddenly doubled. After several seconds, he asked quietly, Is that everything? I almost smiled. No. I removed one final document from the envelope. This concerns another property. Nathan frowned. What property? The one neither of you knew existed. Confusion filled both their faces. I explained everything. A year after Margaret passed away, I had quietly purchased another lakeside property several hours away. A beautiful lodge overlooking a peaceful lake, 3 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, a wraparound porch. The kind of place your mother would have loved. Neither son interrupted. They simply listened. I placed that property into a protected family trust. Nathan whispered, You bought another lake house? Yes. You never told us. No. Why? Because not everything needs to be announced. I watched disbelief spread across his face. Daniel had recently arranged for an independent appraisal. The lodge had become far more valuable than I had ever expected. It was recently valued at $1,100,000. The words seemed to freeze the room. Nathan stared at me. Ethan blinked several times. Neither spoke. I continued quietly. That lodge was supposed to become your inheritance. Nathan's breathing slowed. You mean... Yes. I intended to divide it equally between both of you. Silence. Heavy. Painful. Nathan looked down at the papers. We didn't know. I know. We thought the cabin was everything. I know. I never imagined... His voice disappeared. I leaned back. You were willing to force the sale of a cabin worth less than $400,000. I looked directly at him. You threw away an inheritance worth more than $1 million because you couldn't wait. Nathan covered his face with both hands. Ethan quietly cried beside him. No one moved. No one needed to. Eventually, Nathan looked at me again. Who owns the lodge now? I answered honestly. A conservation foundation. His eyes widened. You donated it? I changed the beneficiaries yesterday. Why? Because inheritance is a privilege. I spoke slowly so neither son could misunderstand. It is not a reward for being related to me. It is something earned through character. Nathan's eyes filled with tears. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I nodded. You did. I wish I could take it back. So do I. He looked around the empty conference room. I thought I was protecting our future. No, I replied gently. You were trying to control mine. Again, silence settled between us. Not the angry silence from before. This one carried regret. Real regret. Nathan finally whispered. I'm sorry, Dad. I believed him. For the first time since this began, I truly believed him. Nathan's apology lingered in the quiet conference room. No one rushed to fill the silence. Some moments deserved to breathe. I looked at my two sons and realized they weren't the same men who had walked into the title office that morning. Their confidence had disappeared, replaced by something far more valuable. Humility. I stood and slipped the documents back into my folder. I'm going home, I said. Neither of them moved. As I reached the door, Ethan finally spoke. Dad, I turned around. I don't expect forgiveness today, he said, his voice trembling. But I hope someday we can earn another chance. I nodded. That decision won't be made with words. He understood immediately. Nathan slowly walked toward me. His expensive jacket no longer mattered. Neither did the money he thought he was about to receive. I spent weeks convincing myself I was doing the right thing, he admitted. I told myself you were getting older. I told myself the taxes were too high. I even convinced myself Mom would have agreed. His voice cracked. But the truth is, I stopped seeing you as my father. He lowered his head. I started seeing you as an obstacle. Those words hurt, not because they surprised me, because they were honest. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Honesty is where rebuilding begins. Tears filled his eyes. I'm ashamed. You should be. But shame isn't where your life ends. He looked at me. It's where your character begins. Without another word, I walked out of the building. Daniel was waiting beside my truck. Everything settled? He asked. As much as it can be. He smiled slightly. I've practiced law for over 20 years. I raised an eyebrow. I've seen families fight over fortunes. I've seen brothers sue each other. I've watched my parents disown children. He paused before continuing. But I've never seen someone teach a lesson the way you did today. I wasn't trying to win. I know. You were trying to save something. I looked toward the title office. My sons. Daniel extended his hand. I hope it works. So do I. We shook hands before going our separate ways. Instead of driving home, I headed north. The familiar highway slowly gave way to winding forest roads. Towering pines lined both sides of the pavement. The farther I drove, the quieter the world became. Eventually, I turned onto a narrow gravel road hidden between the trees. At the end of that road stood the lodge. Sunlight shimmered across the lake exactly as it had the day I first discovered it years earlier. Nothing had changed. The porch still faced the western sky. The fireplace still carried the scent of old cedar. The lake remained perfectly still. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat in Margaret's favorite chair overlooking the water. For a long time, I simply watched the gentle ripples move across the surface. I hope I did the right thing, I whispered. The breeze answered by rustling the pine branches. I smiled. Margaret always believed that life eventually revealed a person's true character. Money didn't create greed. It exposed it. Loss didn't destroy integrity. It revealed whether it had ever existed. As evening approached, my phone rang. It was Ethan. I just wanted to hear your voice, he said. We talked for nearly 40 minutes, not about cabins, not about money, not about lawyers. We talked about fishing, Old family vacations, his children, Margaret's famous apple pie. For the first time in months, the conversation felt genuine. When we hung up, another message arrived. It was from Nathan. There were no excuses, no explanations, only one sentence. I'm going to spend the rest of my life becoming the son you deserved. I stared at the message for a long time before locking my phone. People can promise change in a single sentence. Proving it usually takes years. Over the following months, I watched carefully. Nathan settled the legal claims brought by the disappointed buyers without complaint. He accepted responsibility instead of blaming others. He apologized personally to the realtor for putting him in an impossible position. Most importantly, he stopped asking about money altogether. Instead, he began showing up every other weekend. Sometimes he repaired loose boards around the old cabin. Sometimes he helped stack firewood. Sometimes we simply sat together on the dock in complete silence. Slowly, trust returned. Not all at once. Trust never works that way. It grows one honest decision at a time. Ethan visited even more often. He brought his children fishing. Their laughter once again echoed across the lake, just as Nathan's and Ethan's had decades earlier. Watching my grandchildren run along the shoreline reminded me why I built the cabin in the first place. It had never been about property. It had never been about money. It had always been about family. One autumn evening, months after everything had happened, Nathan quietly sat beside me on the dock. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Do you think Mom would forgive me?" I watched the sun sink below the trees before answering. "Your mother believed people should be judged by who they become, not only by the mistakes they make." He looked toward the water. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to become better." I smiled. "Then she'd already be proud of you." The lake reflected the colors of the sunset exactly as it had for decades. Cabins age, wood weathers. Money comes and goes, but the strongest foundations are never built with concrete or timber. They're built with honesty, patience, forgiveness, and love. Those are the only things that truly become a family's greatest inheritance.